Hi, thank you all for coming. Welcome to the library. My name is Andy Moore. I'm the Assistant Director of the Wayland Library. It's nice to see all of you here. I see a lot of familiar faces and a lot of unfamiliar ones. And to you, I say thanks for coming, and I hope this isn't the last time we see you. I'm just going to make a few brief remarks about what's coming up here at the library. As many of you may know, this year marks the 175th anniversary of our founding. And to that end, we have a number of projects in the works. We've already had one program with a number of scholars who have been researching the library history. And the results of their research are going to be published in a book sometime in May that friends will be selling for us. There's also going to be, I'd like to put a bug in your ear, there'll be a website, companion website to the book. And on May 7th, Sunday, May 7th, we'll be having a gala outdoor celebration with an ice cream truck and cake and face painting for those of you who want to get your faces painted. It's been a while since you've had a ladybug on your cheeks. There'll be a couple of bands playing, one from the high school and a little jazz band that I'll be in. And that will be from 3 to 5 on Sunday, May 7th. A little while later that month, the Friends of the Library are collaborating with Arts Wayland on May 20th from 9 to 12. That's a Saturday also, I believe. And over at the town building, it's going to be a combination plant sale and gardening book sale. So they'll be setting up there. And if you have gardening books you'd like to donate, you can bring them here to the bins downstairs, and they'll get into the sale. That's Sunday, May 20th. There are these nice little flyers at the checkout counter if you'd like to get one. So, without further ado, I'll turn the microphone over to Kathy Crowley, who is the co-owner of Belmont Books and a good friend and colleague of Juliette Faye. Kathy?
Thank you so much. A lot of good events coming up. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be here. I am here in a couple of capacities. First and foremost, as fan and friend of Juliette, and second as a bookseller. And we are all here to celebrate the launch of Juliette's 7th novel, which is amazing. The half of it. So, I was lucky enough to read an early draft of this novel, and I loved it from the very beginning. And it's so exciting to see it coming out to all of you, because if you haven't read it yet, you are in for a big treat. As always, Juliette tells a moving and compelling story through characters we really come to care about and then to leave behind when we finish the story. One of the special things about this book, because that's true of all Juliette's books, I think, is that it's centered on the sort of second half of life. And I can see looking around the room that I'm one of the few people here who's in the second half of life. But she really kind of takes us through some of that world and the complexities and all, with a very generous attitude toward her characters and a story that I think is really moving and important. So I am not going to take up any more time, but I will say it is my pleasure to introduce Juliette Faye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was lovely. Really meaningful to come from somebody who's such a dear friend and a great writer herself. Cannot hear. I need to be louder? That's so strange. I'm usually very loud. So I want to really thank the library. Andy Moore is the assistant director, as you heard, and Courtney Michael is in charge of events, and they're wonderful to work with. Should I wait a minute? No, you're going to just do your thing. How's that? Oh, I can hear it too. All right. Okay, we're cooking. So thank you to the library, and I definitely want a ladybug on my cheek, so I will do that. And I also want to thank all of you for being here. My last book launch was in September of 2021, and everyone was masked. And fewer of you are masked now, and my hope is maybe by my next book we won't have to have any masks at all. Wouldn't that be great? So I want to just take a minute to thank a handful of people who really helped this book to become what it is, and also to sort of get out into the world. And I want to start with my writing group. Randy Susan Myers is here somewhere, and Kathy Crowley. They are two members of my writing group. And they took their writer's eyes and they went through that first draft, and they really gave me so many great recommendations and suggestions. I also have Megan Lucier is here, and Tom Fay and Brianna Fay, who were my early, normal civilian readers. They took their normal people eyes and read it, and that's so useful. Sometimes writers get a little clogged up with craft and that kind of thing, and so to just have somebody have a reaction to it as sort of just a book lover is really helpful. Dr. Paul Allen is here. He is the doctor to all of my characters. They have a problem, they go see Paul. Paul is the guy who I go to and say, now, what would frostbite do to you? So he's always been very helpful to me, and I appreciate that. Also here is Anne-Marie Nieves and her family. She is my ninja publicist. She has this web of connections across the galaxy of media and publishing, and she always does such a great job of getting my books out there. So, and her family, she and her family are here from Queens. So, so I am going to. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, a little bit about sort of the background, some the story, the dirt behind the book, and how I wrote it. I'm going to read very briefly, and then I'm just going to open it up for questions. Ask me anything. And then we're going to sign books and eat cookies. Everyone must eat a cookie. I don't want to bring any cookies home. So first I'm going to give you the elevator pitch for the story. And the elevator pitch in publishing means the description of the book that that only takes the length of an elevator ride should you get into the elevator with either Oprah or Reese Witherspoon. And I'm dying for that to happen. It has not happened yet, but I'm ready. So Helen Spencer's life has been veering off course since she was a teenager. A domino effect of regret that started after a romantic night in the woods with Cal Crosby. Now, 40 years later, Cal Crosby wants to talk about it, but he has no idea of the can of worms he's about to open. He doesn't even know the half of it. So that's the elevator pitch. So the first thing I want to tell you about this book is that it was born out of the pandemic. And now you're terrified and you don't want to read it. But really, it is not about COVID. But it was an idea that came to me out of COVID. And my very wise agent said to me when I was telling her about the idea for this book, she said, "Oh God, don't tell a story about COVID. We're all so sick of it." So it's not about COVID, but it's sort of set in that landscape. So 3 years ago, almost exactly, the world kind of blew up, and we were all terrified, and we didn't know whether you could get it in the mail or from talking to your friends on the phone or whatever. We were all feeling crazy about it. And I would take my daily walks, masked up, waving to neighbors from the other side of the street. And it was fascinating to me how many times people said, "You must be getting so much writing done." Now, we have some writers here, and I just want to shake or nod. Were any of you getting any writing done in March, April, or May of 2020? Do I see any? No. Okay, so we were just as freaked out as you were, but possibly more so because we have highly trained imaginations, and so we were imagining the apocalypse, but just with really good dialogue. Personally, I spent most of my time in my yard, digging holes and moving rocks around. I was very happy out there. And even if I had wanted to write, my living situation had changed dramatically. So my attorney husband, the very adorable Tom Fay, was working from home. He was home, and he needed a door. He needed an office with a door to close because he needed to be able to have confidential conversations with clients. So he took over my office. 2 younger sons moved home. Daughter, the beautiful Brianna, she also moved home, and she sort of took over the living room with her full-time job, Zoom and yoga sessions. Zooming, not during work hours, yoga afterwards. So me and my laptop were sort of like wandering around trying to find like a little corner to call my own. I was much happier out in the yard. But then an idea sort of grabbed me. And it really came from that summer where you started reading articles and talking to people and hearing how people were taking this pause in social interaction to review and reflect and really take stock of their lives. And they were asking themselves questions like, is this really the person I should be with? Is this job right for me? Should I move closer to my family? Should I move farther away from my family? It was all under the umbrella of, am I happy? And it was lockdown, so nobody was making any false moves. But pretty quickly, people started to act on those revelations. And we had the Great Resignation. We had a lot of shifting around of relationships. I just want to interject at this time, because this is always an issue in fiction. This is not a story about me. None of my books are about me. And in fact, if I have to answer the question to am I happy, the answer is yes, I am. Very happy being married to Tom, 32 years, still working out. So far so good, honey. And I love my family, and I love my job, and I love my community. And we're gonna circle back to that one. So by the fall of 2020, one son had moved into his own apartment. Another son had started a semester in the wilds of Wyoming. Beautiful daughter Brianna had moved in her yoga and Zoom sessions into one of their bedrooms. I still had my husband occupying my office, but in a weird sort of pandemic upside, he developed this habit of walking around the house when he was on non-confidential calls and tidying up. And putting the shoes away in the mudroom, and emptying the dishwasher. One time I was sitting, and I look up, and there's a window here, and Tom's got his phone in, he's yakking away, and he's spritzing, and he's wiping the window. He's Windex in the window, outside. So the pandemic was awful, it was terrible, it was so bad, but I'm going to tell you, it was kind of great to make the trade of a housekeeper for an office. And I kind of miss it. Another silver lining was that once I was ready to write, I had nowhere to go and nothing to do. So I started writing this story in August of 2020, and I finished it in March of 2021, which is 7 months, and that is a land speed record for me. So let me tell you a little bit about Helen Spencer, the protagonist of this story. She's 58 years old. She's a fairly recent widow. She just moved to a new town, and she is not a complainer. She is quite happy with her 3-mile-a-day runs and doing the books for her son-in-law, Cormac McGrath, who is the owner of the bakery in town. If you've read any of my previous books, you may recognize Cormac. And taking care of their 1-year-old daughter. She's perfectly happy doing that, if she doesn't think about it too hard. If she scratches the surface a little and delves a little deeper, she realizes that her life really has not worked out in a way that's satisfactory to her. And she really does know where it all started. It was that night in the woods with the boy she loved, who loved her. And the next day, everything went wrong, and it's been going a little bit wrong since then. So let me take a minute to talk about writing a book with a 58-year-old main character. Turns out this is a pretty unusual thing to do. So I will challenge you to try and find a book with a main character, contemporary fiction with a main character in her 50s or 60s for bonus points, physically active, and also still working. And if you can think of one, come up and tell me afterwards. I made Helen 58 for 2 reasons. One was that I realized I was going to have to spend some time in her past, in her teen years. And if I was going back to somebody's teen years, I wanted to go back to my own. I was 58 at the time I wrote it, and I wanted to kind of have a little walk down memory lane and revisit the songs and movies and hairstyles and lingo of that time. I also chose to write a 58-year-old protagonist because there are very few, and I wanted a book with somebody who was kind of a little bit more like me. So fast forward to about a month ago, when a book is about to come out, sometimes if you're lucky, it'll land on a list or two, best books of April, or best book club books or whatever. And so luckily the half of it did land on some lists. Publishers and authors love lists because it's free publicity and it feels really good, and it's all great. So one of the lists that the half of it landed on is books featuring charming older protagonists. And I was like, okay, lists, yay, I'm not complaining, but is Helen charming? Well, she's, kind of, honestly, she's kind of an accidental badass. Is she older? I mean, it begs the question, then who? 57-year-olds? Yes. But the other books on this list, and I'm sure they were all great books, the protagonists were 70s, 80s, 90s. So it didn't really feel like Helen belonged there. But if she doesn't belong there, where does she belong? And why aren't there more books with women in their 50s and 60s? It's really rather shocking, because the fact of the matter is we are so awesome and fascinating. So I had this idea of this woman experiencing regret, sort of coming to this conclusion that she's really made some wrong turns. And the first image that sort of popped into my mind is she's sitting in the woods, and maybe on a bench in the woods, and sort of looking out over a river. And actually that bench exists about a mile from here in Greenways. So if you want to go see where Helen had her little come to Jesus with herself, you can go to Greenways and take the path out, and there's the bench overlooking the Sudbury River. So here she is sort of navel gazing, and I thought, okay, we got to get something going here. So I send a little kid running through, and eventually his grandfather comes running after him, and I thought, maybe the two of them start talking. Helen's got her little granddaughter on her back, and maybe as one does sometimes with strangers, they start to reveal more to each other than you would, you feel like you're never going to see this person again. I can kind of maybe say, maybe they start talking about how, things didn't work out as planned, and maybe they start having a little play group or something, and they sort of help each other. So boring. I was like, no, that's a non-starter. But then I thought, what if this guy was there when things started to go wrong? What if he's the reason for the regret? And that's when I was like, okay, I think we might have a novel here. So once I came up with this idea of sort of where the regret came from, and knowing that I was going to have to go back and forth, I knew I was going to have to go back and forth between sort of current day and 40 years ago. And I really started thinking about this idea of the domino theory, which I'm kind of slightly obsessed with, to be honest. And it's that sense of like, one little thing happens, one decision. So you make a decision, somebody else makes a decision. It's raining, and you don't go to the place you were going to go, or whatever. And that has a ripple effect, and it sort of creates this reverberation through your life. And sometimes that ripple effect is really good and wonderful and lucky. And sometimes, as in Helen's case, it really is not. It really leads to one little decision that's not so great, leads to the next not so great little decision, and to the next, and suddenly things have gone completely sideways. So I was thinking about my own life and how, were there any good examples of the domino effect in my own life? And I came up with a pretty good one, I think. So when I was in my 20s, I was living with my wonderful sister, Jennifer Allen, and we had an apartment together in the Boston area. There was this party at a bar in Cambridge I wanted to go to. I knew there would be some people there I knew. And I said to her, I'm going to this party. Do you want to go? And she said, no. I said, all right, you don't have to go. And she said, well, I'll go, but if I go, you can't leave me. I know you, and I know you're going to go off and start chatting with people, and you're going to leave me by myself, and it's going to be no fun. My sister is slightly less of an extrovert than I am. So I said, sure, of course, I won't leave you. So we go to this party, we have a great time, we don't leave each other. At the end of the night, we're dancing with these two guys that I kind of knew from college, Paul and Matt. And I can tell that Paul is kind of taking a shine to my sister. He's kind of got his eye on her. And when the lights go up and it's time to go home, he says to me, "You should invite me over for dinner," knowing that we lived together. And I thought, well, this guy's bold. This is a bold move. I kind of have to appreciate this. And I said, all right, you can come over for dinner. I said, what are you going to bring? He said, ice cream. Yeah, they answer like that. Ice cream. And he said, you should invite Matt. This guy's like planning my whole itinerary here. So I said, great, I'll invite, you're both invited over for dinner. I set up the dinner party. The dinner party happens. I'm chatting with Matt, and I'm complaining to him that I just moved back to the Boston area. I can't really find a church that I like. It feels, it all feels sort of stodgy and uninspiring. And he said, I agree with you. And as a matter of fact, I'm pulling together a group of people our age who are going to, sort of start setting up some events or activities for, people our age. And it'll be a little more progressive and active and that kind of thing. And would you like to come? The first meeting is in a couple of weeks. And I said, yeah, I'll come. So I go to this meeting, and I met a very handsome young attorney wearing red suspenders in Palm Bay. So if Jennifer had stayed with her initial decision not to come to the party, would I have danced with Paul and Matt? Would Paul have invited himself over for dinner? I don't think so, frankly. I think he was inspired by her beauty. And I think that maybe I wouldn't have found out about this meeting, and maybe I would never have met Tom. Maybe I would have, but we'll never know. And so obviously that one decision by my sister 35 years ago resulted in my getting married. It also resulted in her getting married, because she and Paul are married. And think how sad it would be for Tom and Paul never to have met the Daisy sisters. Tragic. So 2 marriages, 7 children, as a result of that one decision. And one of those children is here, and I just want to say to her, maybe later, not during our talk, my talk, but maybe later you want to thank your Aunt Jen for your existence, because she's the reason you're here. So one more thing I just want to talk about before I do a little quick reading is that this book, once again, takes place in the fictional town of Belem, Massachusetts, which looks suspiciously like Wayland, Massachusetts. And I'll tell you the reason for that. Way back in the 2000s when I first started writing, I didn't know if I was ever going to get published. I didn't even really think about getting published. I really just did this thing because I enjoyed it. I really like creating characters and building worlds and spinning plots and causing trouble with my characters. That was really why I did it. And so the setting of Shelter Me was a town, and I freely admit that I just ripped off Wayland, and I kind of moved the names around, just because it tickled me to do so. And so, for instance, we have this little lakeside dive bar called the Dudley Chateau, which we in Wayland affectionately call it the Shat. And so I made it in my book the Palace or the Pal. And so then, surprisingly, Shelter Me gets published, and it was really fun to sort of let my fellow, town members in on the joke. So Shelter Me was that first book that was set in Belem. 2 books later, people were sort of asking about sequels and that kind of thing, and I really didn't have any sequels, but I had this idea that if I set this next book, The Shortest Way Home, in Belem, and maybe used a few of the characters from the last book, people could have a little sense of what happened to those characters while also meeting new characters and a whole new story. So that was The Shortest Way Home. The next book was The Tumbling Turner Sisters. That is a story about a family that performs in vaudeville in 1919. So none of the same characters, but as a little nod to Belem, I had one of the characters be from Boston, and he plays the piano at the Pal. So that was fun. I don't know if anybody picked up on that, but I did. That was good. So now we have the 3rd book set in Belem. And the character that seems to be the thread throughout the books, he's always a secondary character, and it's Cormac McGrath, the owner of the bakery, Cormac's Confectionery. He was the cousin of the main character in Shelter Me, the best friend from high school of the main character from The Shortest Way Home, and he is now the son-in-law of Helen Spencer from The Half of It. And I have this little fantasy that someday I'm going to put out the Bellum collection as a box set. We'll see. We'll see about that. All right. So now I'm going to read you chapter 1, but I have condensed it and abridged it because we want to get going here. We've got cookies to eat. So if you, for some reason, read it on my website or you read it early, this will not be quite exactly the first chapter, but it's pretty close. Helen sits on her favorite bench in the woods by the river, body hitched forward to accommodate the baby backpack. Limp, fleece-swaddled legs dangle by her hips. Fall is in full profusion here in Bella, Massachusetts. Yellow leaves glint like gold off the surface of the water as they glide by. But Helen doesn't see the beauty. Her blank stare conjures only the wrong terms. Regret is a thing with teeth. There's movement out of the corner of her eye, and from the briefest moment, she's sure it's an animal that will chew her to bits. But it's not. It's a small child, maybe 3 years old, running. His chubby fists clench as his body concentrates on propelling him forward, and he's grinning to himself. Then he catches sight of her, and his eyes go round in fear. His foot hits a root, and he spills forward onto his belly, his lovely little face smacking into the dirt. Helen runs to him as he lets out a wail of pain, the sleeping 1-year-old on her back jostling against her so that she almost falls right on top of him. "Hey," she coos, squatting down. "Hey there." She doesn't want to touch him. Children are so well-versed in stranger danger these days. But he can't seem to lift himself out of the dirt and only manages to roll over onto his back like a baby turtle. "Can I help you up?" she asks. "Yes," he wails. She lifts him, intending only to right him onto his feet, but he clamps his arms behind her neck and wraps his legs around her waist like a baby monkey. She gets a better grip on him and stands up, gently wiping at the dirt on his cheeks with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. "Where's your grown-up?" "I runned away." "You ran away from who?" "My grandpa." "Why did you run away from him?" "I played a trick," he wails. "Grandpa." Okay, Helen croons, trying not to laugh. "Don't worry, we'll find Grandpa." In the distance, a man's voice booms, "Logan! Logan, where are you?" The panic in that voice makes Helen's heart hurt. She's occasionally lost track of a child and knows there is nothing more terrifying. "He's here," she calls back. "Logan's here. He's okay." "I'm okay," the little boy echoes in his high, sweet voice. "I'm okay, Grandpa." As he rounds a turn in the path, the man's face is ashen with worry. Either that or he has alarmingly bad circulation. He, too, has a baby on his back, and a little pink-capped head bobs in and out of view from an oversized pack. "Hi, Grandpa," Logan sings out, as if this is a pleasant surprise rather than a mildly traumatic event that he himself set in motion. He leaps to his grandfather's arms, and the guy grips the kid, pressing him into his chest a little too tightly. His face somehow sets off a ping of memory, but before Helen can study it further, tears form in the man's eyes. "Jesus, Logan," he chokes out, "you scared the shit out of me." "That's a bad word," says Logan from inside the man's nearly smothering embrace. "Sorry." The man shifts the child into one arm and puts a hand up to pinch the tears out of his eyes. "Don't tell Mommy, okay?" "That's okay. Jesus is good." A laugh bursts out of the man then, and he catches Helen's eye, and they both start to laugh. Helen puts a hand up to her mouth. She wants to keep this feeling. With his face relaxed and smiling, the memory comes clear. Cal Crosby. With no sign of recognition, eyes still twinkling with humor, he pulls the child back to look at him. The little boy puts his hand up to his grandfather's cheek, finger pressing on an errant tear. "Is it raining?" "A little," he says, "though the sky is a cloudless crayon blue, but it'll pass." There's a squawk from the pink cat behind him, and he kisses the boy and attempts to lower him to the ground, but Logan isn't having it. "Hold me," he begs. "Mackenzie needs her bottle, buddy." "My legs hurt," he whines. Helen decides this is her escape hatch. Let him deal with the bruised toddler and the hungry baby. No one wants other adults bearing witness to the inept handling of unhappy children. Helen's children had loved to throw fits in public. A 2-year-old Danny once howled like he'd been hit with a hammer because she wouldn't let him hold the steak knives in her shopping cart at Target. She has a brief vindictive wish for Logan to throw a good fist and foot flailing thrasher, something to make Cal Crosby really cry. But honestly, does she even care anymore? It was all so long ago. Oceans of water have passed under countless bridges. She's brought 3 humans into the world, buried a husband in the enforced emptiness of a pandemic, moved to a little town where she knows no one except her daughter and son-in-law, who are utterly engrossed in the endless blessing of this baby and the endless exhaustion of new parenthood. At 58, Helen Spencer somehow finds herself relegated to solitude at the edge of other people's lives. Maybe she's due for a good fisted, foot-flailing thrasher herself. It's for the best that Cal doesn't recognize her. Who wants to revisit that mess? Better to move on, put one foot in front of the other. She's always been a good little marcher. But before she heads down the path, she takes one last look at the boy's smudged, angelic face and feels a duty to say, he hit the dirt pretty hard, tripped over that root there. I tripped. Logan's lower lip quivers at the memory of his impressive fall. The baby is crying in earnest now, sobs coming in little jags between gulps of air. The man is trapped between 2 small children and their oversized needs. He looks around as if hoping to MacGyver a solution out of twigs and moss. He's an Eagle Scout, she remembers, but fire building won't help him now. She actually feels bad for him. In 40 years, she has had not one moment of pity for Cal Crosby. So it's kind of interesting. Also, how does he not recognize her? Honestly, this is the most interesting thing that's happened to her in months. Hey, Logan, she says, how about if I hold you while Grandpa feeds the baby? We can sit on this bench over here. The boy leans out to her, and she collects him into her arms again. But when she walks toward the bench, she whimpers, I don't want to sit. It's my favorite bench, she says. You'll love it. She snuggles him onto her lap and gives him a teasing little poke. See, isn't this fun? He's confused by this. What's so fun about sitting on a bench, after all? Only moments ago, she was sitting on this very bench having 0 fun, negative fun. But now she's enjoying herself. It's like reading a plot-twisty book and wondering when the truth will reveal itself. Cal hauls the little banshee out of the backpack, cradles her in one arm, and dabs a bottle on her bottom lip, trying to get her to realize that he's giving her the very thing she's demanding at such a high decibel. Finally, she latches on and slurps hungrily. Cal puts a finger against the bottom, adjusting it to the proper angle. A pro, thinks Helen. But then she wonders how he lost Logan. Maybe he's slipping. She slides over on the bench. Want to sit? He gives her a quick smile as he sinks down and tugs off his wool cap. His short-cropped hair is a little more auburn now. It was bright red back then, and he'd kept it long, even for 1981. All that flowing beauty. It had felt like silk against her fingers. His eyes are still that soft blue she remembers a little too well, and there's a scar in his upper lip that wasn't there 40 years ago. So that's how you turned out, she thinks. Focusing back on his potential incompetence, Helen asks, how'd you lose him? Cal shakes his head. I was changing the baby, and I was just getting her into the pack, and I look around and he's gone. My youngest would take off every chance he got, she says. I had to hang on to him so often, I was afraid his wrists would have permanent indentations. Youngest? Cal's perplexed gaze shifts to the baby still asleep in the backpack. She's not, Helen stammers. She's my granddaughter. His eyebrows shoot up. Oh, I just assumed. You can't possibly have thought I was her mother. Well, I figured maybe later in life. Helen lets out a snort. Not this late. He frowns at her. You could be mid-40s. It's not that far-fetched. Look at me. He's on the defensive now. Seriously, you have great skin and... Cal, look at me. Thank you. All right, questions, burning questions. Otherwise, you're all going to have to just go back there and mow down some cookies. So, That's right, it could be me, don't worry. Yes, Juliette.
Isn't it hard to write so much stuff ahead and try to come back to it late in the day?
That is a great question. So Julia said, is it hard to write like that and then come back to like real life, right? A little bit. Sometimes when I'm still sort of in the moment and somebody says, well, what do we have for dinner or whatever, I'm like, no, I'm still with my friends. So yes, that's true. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Bill.
Julie, you made the move into historical fiction with the two books, Tumbling Systems and City of Flickering Lights. And I wonder if you ever thought about going back to that genre, or would you continue to do more contemporary?
I really like both genres. I would definitely consider going back to historical fiction. I'm sort of seeing how things go right now. Right now, my publisher is kind of into the contemporary, and I kind of have to go where, they want to actually publish me. So I'm sticking with that for now. But I definitely think there's historical fiction in my future. So thank you. Appreciate that. Yes.
7 months? That's all you took to
7 months. Yeah, it was crazy.
what does your schedule look like to get this kind of book done in 7 months?
So it's not,
You up in the middle of the night?
sometimes, yeah. I mean, I don't sleep that great anyway, so sometimes I'm up in the middle of the night. I think, I'll just go get a little bit of work done. It was kind of nuts. It was just like and it was also really timely because it was the fall and I couldn't garden anymore. So it was like, all right, well now what am I going to do? I guess I'll write this book. And it was very, the story felt very compelling to me. So I was very happy to just sit there and do my thing. And also I really, none of us really were going anywhere. So there wasn't much distraction. And it felt like a little bit of I can't take a real vacation. So I can go be with my, I can sort of take this vacation. So it was very enjoyable for me, but it was fast. Yeah.
And when did you know what the conclusion of the story?
I
Did you have a sense?
kind of knew. We're not going to talk about it. You don't know. You haven't read it, right? No. Okay. I don't know. I mean, some people were telling me like, I got it yesterday, and I'm like, that's great. It's awesome. So you don't know. I had an idea of where I was going with this. There were some things that changed in the end. There were some things that came up that I was like, that's maybe we'll do. So the way that I write, some people, it's the whole plotters and pantsers things. Plotters plot everything out. They know everything's going to happen in every chapter. Pantsers fly by the seat of their pants. And I'm sort of in the middle, really. So I've been thinking about this story for a while, so I sort of had a sense of, what we're doing here. But it always is nice to be surprised, too, for me. So when I sort of decided, where we were going with the ending, it was like, oh, cool, okay, So that's fun. Thank you. Yes?
So do your children read your books, if you don't mind saying something about it?
In front of one of them. Well,
Yeah, especially because they're from another generation.
Sure. So the one who's here is my favorite tonight, in part because she's here, and in part because she has read, I think, all of them. And it's, I don't know whether it's a gender thing. My boys, one of my kids has read one of my boys has read one of my books. The other two kind of have this like, why would I do that attitude? I'm like, I don't know, because I'm your mother. I mean, I don't know. I've read everything, But so yeah, it's funny, and I sort of am like, well, if you want to, you will. If you don't, you won't. My daughter actually is really helpful in terms. I give her the manuscript early, so she could say, well, this isn't, I don't think you're clear here, or this is. Especially with younger people, she can say, well, that's not how we would say it, or whatever. she was great when she was a teenager. She gave me all the teen speak and stuff like that, so it was great. Yeah. Yes, Kent.
It sounds like this one came to you as a new story idea, but I know you probably have a mental index card of some story ideas. How have you decided which to go with and in what order, and why did you let this one jump in as a new idea?
That's such a great question. It's funny. I think that's true, and I think the other writers here can probably tell you the same thing. Like, you have ideas all the time. And it's really about sort of what grabs you. Because, I wrote this one in 7 months, but then there was a whole, I had a bunch of people to send it to, and then who gave me suggestions, and then I did a bunch of revisions, and then I sent it to, my agent took it to my editor, and of course she had, so this is it has to be something you're willing to live with. Characters and a plot and a concept that you want to live with for a couple of years. So you kind of know when you know. It's like, oh yeah, this idea really grabs me. And sometimes I'll take notes. I collect, things, ideas or scenarios or some funny way some guy, puts his hand on his hip or something. And then something starts to kind of cook, starts to roll. And that was, so that's usually what happens for me, is that I just, something grabs me. Yeah. Yes.
How long did it take you to write your other books?
The other ones were all different. On average, I would say it's about a year for a first draft, for a pretty good-looking first draft. Some people write, sort of write down the bones kind of thing, and they just sort of, like, they don't worry about whether or not it sounds good or whatever. They're just trying to get the plot out there or whatever. I kind of I spend enough time on each chapter to get it pretty close to what I think will be. So, often it'll be about a year. Historical fiction takes longer because there's a lot more research to do. And you can write a paragraph and have to stop, for an hour to say, how much did a cheese sandwich cost in 1919, And suddenly, and also there's so many interesting things out there, and you're down the rabbit hole finding out all kinds of crazy stuff that you will never use. So historical fiction does take longer, but I would say on average about a year. And different writers are different. I know people who write 5 months, and others who take years. So it's pretty individual. Thanks for that question, Carol.
Now that you're on your 7th book, do you have any more control over the editing process of the book?
Isn't she cute? I wish. But it's funny. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, I think a strong editorial process is important because, much as nobody likes to be told that something is imperfect, mostly the editorial process is like, oh, she's right, I gotta redo that, whatever. It's a very useful process. And occasionally, I've read a book by somebody who's sort of a big name, and I think their editor was a little afraid of them. This book's a little too long. This book's getting a little, sort of in the weeds, where, an editor who, was not so concerned about the big name and keeping the big name and keeping the big name happy might have said, we're going to cut a bunch of this out. So I think that doesn't always result in a great process, always. But to maybe answer your more pointed question, no, I am not at the point where I'm scaring editors yet. But it's open. Natalie, yes.
Do I dare ask?
Oh, now I'm scared.
If your mother has ever been an inspiration for you?
Oh, this is my mother's dear friend. She wants to know if my mother has ever been an inspiration for me. No, she has not, because as she likes to point out to me, I write mean mothers. And my mother is delightful. Right, Mom? She's a delight. No, why would I do that? No, I'm just kidding. Yes?
I was wondering, do you enjoy reading fiction, and how do you read differently, or how does one read as a writer?
That's a really great question. And sometimes there is a way in which it's a little bit of, I don't know if you guys know this expression, the busman's holiday, where it's, you know, like you're reading and you can't shut off that part of your brain that's like, that's an interesting word that she used right there. How does she build this character? You know, you're sort of looking for the man or the woman behind the curtain a little bit, as opposed to just being in that lovely bubble of, you know, sort of the story. And I know that when I'm reading a book that's really got me for not like just turning the pages and not sort of dissecting how they did it, that they've really got me, and it's probably a really good book for me anyway. I mean, we all have our opinions, but yeah, it is definitely different reading as a writer. And I'll tell you, this is not your question, but I'll add on to this. I get to meet a lot of authors, and they're almost completely wonderful, smart, lovely people. Occasionally, you know, you meet an author that you really like, and they're kind of a jerk, and then you're like, no, I can't read your books anymore. So don't meet any authors. Just I'm not telling. I'll tell you later. Barb.
Can you talk a little bit about how the cover was developed?
Sure. So this cover, I would hold it up for you, but I love this cover. I think it's super. Beth, can I just? Okay, so I think this is a great cover. And it's the only cover I've ever gotten where I had no recommendations, like the font's too small or whatever. So I think I love the colors. It was the first time I've had a cover that was designed specifically for me. So usually in the past, my covers have been photographs, and they buy stock photos, and then they play with them and whatever. So it's not, you know, most book covers are not designed specifically, or they designed, but they're not. The photo wasn't taken for that specific book. This, you can see the threads of gray in Cal's red hair on this if you look very closely. So what happened was my editor, the editor will always ask you for your ideas. What are your ideas about the cover? And then they get that email and they tear it up and they throw it out because they don't really want you to have any opinions about anything. So I had this whole long, you know, why it should be, but I wanted this is called a graphic cover. It's not a photograph. It's a, you know, it's a picture, or I should say it's a, you know, it's design, it's art. And she was like, great. And what did the art department come back with but a picture of, and it takes place in the fall, hence the beautiful shortbread cookies with, you know, fall colors, which you will all eat. So I wanted fall colors, and, you know, this was, so it was fall leaves, like up in a canopy with the blue sky behind it, in the shape of a heart. And the font was horrible. I just was like, so my editor, this is the only time this ever happened to me, I was like, oh my God. She said, I know you've been waiting for your cover, and here's why you're not going to get it. I'm going to show you the best cover they gave me, and it was the heart one. She goes, I'm sending it back to the drawing board, and I want a new designer on this. I was like, oh my God, I love you. I'm going to kiss you on the lips when I see you. And then what they came back with was this, and she said to me, was it worth the wait? I was like, 1,000%. So I am pretty psyched about this cover. Thank you for asking, so I can gush about it.
Any thoughts
Oh, great question. I'll review it. Okay, so this is a great question. Cynthia asked, do I have any preference about whether or not people read my books, print or ebook, I assume, or listen? And that the top books are now they're being listened to more than read in print. So here's my position on this. I love when anyone wants to have any interaction with anything, any book I've ever written. So anything is fine with me. I myself am a big audiobook listener. That being said, I also know, because I listen to a lot of books on audio, that a bad narrator can really kind of mess it up. By the same token, a really good narrator can really enhance the experience. So what you worry about is getting a bad narrator. They give me usually about 4 people to choose from. I listen to samples. I spend an absurd amount of time listening to everything they ever spoke and picking somebody that I think is good. And I think generally they have been good. So that, but I will tell you this, I can't listen to my own books because nobody narrates it the way I hear it in my head. So they're all bad to me, but I think you will like them. It's the best I can do. So, Mom.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Well, you're going to ask one, aren't you?
Did you ever think of narrating your own books? You're such a great actress.
Well, thank you. My mother thinks I'm a great actress. So I'm going to take that right to Hollywood. My mother thinks I'm a great actress. So I did with my first book. That was back in the days when not everything went to audio. If your book went to audio, it was a big deal. So they were like, psyched, we're going to do an audio contract. And I was like, great, am I going to read it? And my agent was like, oh, well. But basically what she said to me is, if you want to, you can. Let me tell you this. Audio narration is a real art. It's a really specific art, and you probably won't be as good as anybody else they can get. And she also said, you will not get paid almost anything for it, and it's incredibly boring because you have to say the same things over and over again. So she basically, squished it out of me, and I've never asked again. And I do think it's probably for the best. I don't, as much as you love my voice, Mom, which is wonderful, I think I wouldn't be as good. I think I wouldn't be as good.
It's not just your voice, it's your acting.
Well, thank you. I had a lot of babies, so I really know what they would sound like. So, thank you, Mom. Jerry.
Just following along on that, I will tell you that every book I've read of yours, which has been all of them, I read it with your voice. I read it here in my house, but I am hearing you tell it.
Okay, this is my aunt. She's known me for a very, very, very long time. And, it's funny. I don't know if that's a good thing. I try to, what I want your experience to be is that you just get lost in the book. And you don't think, oh my gosh, little Julie wrote this,
But it's not that, because it's not distracting. Whenever I read a book, I always hear it as well as read it.
Right.
And I read yours, it's your voice, which to me just
Thank you so much. I have my family here, and they're just all going to say nice things. So be prepared for that. My family's doing this. Okay, so I think maybe one more question. Bill, you had a turn, so I'm going to see if anybody else. Anybody else? Megan's swatting a fly. That's not a real question. Yes.
He's closing her own breath.
Do you take a specific length of time between books? Do you take a break? And the second part, do you ever get inspired to start on another book or restart writing some things down for another one?
Okay, great question. Do I take a break in between books, and do I sometimes start writing notes for other books while I am more or less monogamous with books. I know people who've got many books going at the same time. I don't get that. I'm with my people, whoever those people are. I do generally take a break in between. And I think it's I feel it not on purpose, but it's like the well needs to fill back up again. Also, I'm sort of working on revisions and stuff with another book. But once I do sometimes take notes, this is a sort of a cool newspaper article or a story I heard or whatever that might, so I'll open a file and just start writing some notes. But I generally, I write them one at a time. I do take some time off in the middle. So, Delita. All right, one more.
I seem to remember when you wrote the last book, and you were talking about the last book, you said you were writing another book, and then you got bored of it, and then you wrote that, and then you were inspired by this other one, so you just totally Wow.
That is true. That is completely true. Yes, you're right. All right, she's called me out. This is what your friends do to you at your book launch, okay? I'm totally copping to it, Delita. You've got me. That's great.
Did you ever write that one?
No, it bored me. And that's what I'm saying, is when you have to have something that's really going to grab you and hang on to you. And if it doesn't hang on to you, you might as well just move on, you know? Sort of like a bad boyfriend, you know, just move on. All right. If you have more questions, please come up and ask me afterwards. I will be signing books. I will be chatting. I am so grateful to all of you for being here and to the Wayland Library for hosting me. Thank you very much.